Unit 5 has a lot going on. A lot of moving parts, a lot of graphs, but the big idea here is stabilization policy. This is when the central bank or the Fed uses monetary policy or the government, Congress, tries to use fiscal policy to smooth out fluctuations in the economy, make recessions less painful, make inflation less dramatic, limit unemployment, etc. The Phillips curve is a great way to kind of show this idea. Quickly going over this, inflation on the Y, unemployment on the x-axis, and there's no relationship between inflation and unemployment in the long run, but there is a nice trade-off we can have in the short run, illustrated by the LRPC. Shifters of this graph. The LRPC is shifted by any shift of the SRAS, which remember is RAP, or resource prices, actions of the government, or productivity. So when SRAS shifts inwards, right, LRPC shifts outwards. Just remember that it's the opposite direction. We will move along the line on the LRPC, downward, for example, based on shifts in aggregate demand. So AD moves along the line, SRAS shifts the line. I'm referring to LRPC there. For LRPC, any change in the natural rate of unemployment will shift the LRPC in or out. That could be things like unemployment benefits or an aging population or just like cultural norms regarding work and leisure. Hyperinflation. This is really, really heavy inflation. This can go into millions and millions of percentage points. Recent examples would be in places like Venezuela, Zimbabwe, even Serbia, Uzbekistan. It causes people to flee to other currencies, so you really don't want to be holding these currencies if they're losing massive amounts of purchasing power really, really quickly. So often people will default to something like the US dollar. Could be caused by war or revolutions, any kind of instability. The short-run Phillips curve. Again, inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. SRAS shift equals LRPC shift. AD shift, movement along the line. This is a hard thing. A lot of students mess this up. Please don't. The LRPC, no relationship between inflation and unemployment. And LRPC, I didn't mention this earlier, is equal to the NIRU at the x-axis. The NIRU is the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. The velocity of money. This is a ratio of nominal GDP to the money supply. So basically, if the money supply goes up, how much can we see nominal GDP go up by? And that ratio tells you the velocity of money. Basically, it's just how many times a $1 bill, like a piece of paper bill, right, would actually get spent throughout the year. That's how quickly it moves. Here's your formula. M times V equals P times Y. You're going to be asked to move some of these variables around using really, really basic algebra. Just remember what these variables stand for and you'll be okay. The long-run neutrality of money. Kind of controversial here, but the basic idea is that the money supply can really only impact nominal values in the economy. It can't improve the economy in real terms in the long run. So all this money supply stuff, it can really only smooth out those fluctuations. You're not really going to be able to stimulate things like growth, productivity, well-being through pure monetary policy. Again, kind of controversial though. A budget deficit, this is referring to the government, it's when they have more money going out than coming in. It can lead to public borrowing, which means debt, and that might cause crowding out, because if they're not bringing in the money through taxes, then they're going to have to borrow it, which could increase the demand for loanable funds and drive up the interest rate. A budget surplus means they've got more money coming in, usually from taxes, than going out. That'd be G for government spending. They could either spend more, tax less, or save it. Deficit spending. We're kind of building towards this idea of crowding out. So this is extra government spending, even though they have a deficit going on already. It might be necessary, though, during recessions. And deficit spending is something in macroeconomics we've kind of gotten more comfortable with over time. But it could cause crowding out, reducing private investment. And remember, private investment is key for long-term growth. Got to be careful. Interest-sensitive expenditures. This is a mouthful. It's kind of a complicated word. It really just means investment and consumption. When interest rates are high, that means there's a pretty large opportunity cost of consumption because you could have used that money to go earn money, right, through any kind of interest-bearing account or financial asset. Crowding out, here it is. This is always on the exam. It's caused by deficit spending. It's when the government increases its demand for loanable funds, so that shifts outwards the demand for loanable funds. That's a positive shift, and that increases the quantity of loanable funds, but more importantly, pushes up the real interest rate, and that pushes down private investment, which could actually reduce investments in capital stock and growth in the long run. Economic growth. This is an increase in potential RGDP in an economy. It doesn't mean everybody's got more money. It's all about production. Can you make more stuff? Are you more productive? If you remember back to the PPC graphs, this is like you shift out the X and the Y intercept on those. So that's kind of cool. Physical capital. This is the tools, machines, and technologies that businesses use to make stuff. It's the stuff you can touch, right? Better physical capital, maybe in a place like, Silicon Valley in California, should mean better productivity. Human capital, though, also really important. This is your training, your education, your smarts. And creativity is kind of an important one, too, that a population has. This is really what makes Silicon Valley kind of special, proximity to a place like Stanford and all these smart engineers and people moving there. Lots of human capital, hence we get really productive firms coming out of that area. Productivity. It's a ratio. Try to remember that. It's how much input do you have to put in to get output, right? So better physical or human capital will mean more relative productivity compared to maybe a country or a firm with less productive capital. GDP per capita, for this class, is the best measure we have of well-being, right, or standard of living. All goods and services in a year measured in dollars, but now we're adjusting it for population size. So divide by population. It's a pretty good measurement of standard of living. It's not perfect, though. All right, I love this function or this graph, the aggregate production function. Okay, so real GDP per worker on the y-axis. Physical capital per worker on the x-axis. So it's a ratio between those two, right? So how much productivity are you getting per worker based on, let's say, a set amount of capital? If we set that capital at PC1, right, physical capital 1, and we see an increase of productivity from productivity 1 up to productivity 2, I don't know, maybe we get nice education initiative, or simply time can just pass and sort of society gets more productive, hopefully, then we should see more output per worker. That's productivity growing because of increases in probably human capital in this case. Public policy. This is any government action. It could be a response or a strategy, all about managing the well-being of the country, specifically the economy for this class. So fiscal policy, monetary policy, where are they spending on infrastructure? Where are those investments directed? Public investment. This is investment in productive capital, especially things related to stuff like infrastructure, like schools, roads, bridges, electricity. And then, of course, research and development. The government actually does a lot of this. Think back to things like the Apollo program and the moon landing. All sorts of new technologies come out of R&D from the government. Infrastructure. These are your basic facilities for a society. Things like roads, electricity, and schools. Supply side economics. Get a little political here, kind of controversial. This is the idea that you can grow the economy through lower taxes and less regulation. Now that might, seem pretty straightforward, and in some ways it is, but remember, what's bigger, the spending multiplier or the tax multiplier? Well, it's the spending multiplier, and supply side maybe has a little bit of a hole there, but again, controversial. Definitely some strong arguments to be made here, though. Capital stock. This is the productive equipment and facilities in an economy. It's a magic word in macro. Capital stock. This is how we get productivity and growth. Machines, tools, and technologies. But remember, quantity and quality matter. Soviet Union actually had a large amount of capital stock, but maybe the quality wasn't quite as good, and that left their economy lacking in terms of growth potential in the long run. That's all I got for you. Thanks for watching.